There's been a drastic shift in Korean relations in the past week, with leaders saying they will work toward nuclear disarmament and an official end to the Korean War. What does this mean for the future? Carrie Saldo discussed the issue with Paul Musgrave, assistant professor of political science at UMass Amherst.
Well, I think that what last week's history-making summit showed is that the most important factors driving events on the Korean Peninsula are the people on the Korean Peninsula. Of course, that's North Korean leader Kim and South Korean President Moon. And since last year,
it seems like, we're always talking about it here in the United States, and those the key players sometimes get lost in that shuffle.
That's right. I mean, there's a really understandable tendency for the United States to want to see itself as a central player in everything. But we have to remember that Kim and Moon, North Korea, South Korea, they have their own interests and agendas. And even the United States is not the only outside player in this actor. There's China, Japan, even Russia that's involved as well.
In terms of their making this very, very historic declaration last week, 3 key points came out of it, right? To improve inter-Korean relations with the goal of reunification, to reduce tensions and eliminate the danger of war, and to establish peace. Why do you think those three key pieces were the ones that they really pushed out?
Well, I think one of the most important ones is the first one you mentioned, which is to reestablish relations between North and South. And over the last decade, those relations have almost completely frozen after the last round of suspensions following the last round of nuclear tests. And so you have to first establish a set of ground rules. The general idea, though, of moving toward peace is one that's really interesting and it's really fraught because there's all sorts of details that matter a lot, details about words like denuclearization that are going to have to be worked out so that we know exactly what the two Koreas are negotiating over.
Meaning how denuclearization is being defined?
That's exactly right.
And in your approximation, how is it being defined by the various sides at this point?
Well, I think that different sides have different interpretations. For the United States, denuclearization has a clear meaning. It means that North Korea commits to complete, verifiable, and irreversible removal of its nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons making capability. For North Korea, it's a little bit more open-ended, and it includes nuclear powers pulling out of the Korean Peninsula, and that, of course, includes the United States itself. So that's a very big difference between a unilateral and a bilateral drawdown.
What do you make of recent news that North Korea is now saying it's pulling, or there's footage of North Korea removing cables from its nuclear site? But this sort of was interesting to me because we also have North Korea calling for the United States to commit to the fact that it will not attack North Korea, and then North Korea will agree to denuclearize. So is this North Korea sort of putting pressure on the United States in a very public way? What do you make of those moves that it's making right now?
It's really hard to say exactly what's going on, and as you say, the news can change almost any moment. And I think that there's a lot of really dramatic things going on in North Korea. And those are all great. But sometimes it's really easy to look at things and see this great visual of cables being removed, or in the last round, cooling towers being destroyed, and to forget that North Korea has built nuclear weapons. North Korea is probably a nuclear power right now, and dismantling even important sites, those can be rebuilt, and it doesn't change the fact that North Korea retains a nuclear capability.
Regarding North and South Korea and its historic summit last week, we've seen sort of similar declarations from them in the past, and those fell apart. Do you think that what's happening now is different and there's a potential for stronger and better outcomes?
I think that what's happening now is different, and I think there are 2 key factors that really explain why it's different. The first, North Korea has a nuclear capability. They've gone far beyond anything they ever had in previous rounds. That gives the Kim regime a sense of security and an ability to deter an invasion by the United States, which has been their prime motive all along. The second thing that's different is the political climate in South Korea and the United States, where South Korea and the U.S. both have presidents who, for very different reasons, are willing to start meeting with Kim without the sorts of preconditions that had been part of their goal previously.
And so with this, looking at the fact that President Trump and President Kim have agreed to meet, where does North Korea and South Korea's recent talks fit into that, or change how our current president might approach the North Korean president?
In some sense, what's going on here is a little bit like what happened in Germany in 1989 and 1990 when the Berlin Wall fell down and East and West Germany started having direct talks. The United States and South Korea, North Korea, and China are all going to have serious conversations about what the future of the Korean Peninsula looks like. South Korea's current president is a little bit cool to American interests. Donald Trump is also somebody who, for good reasons and for bad reasons, is going to be very incentivized to go for a big short-term win, like the ending of the Korean War and possibly even a more lasting reconciliation, even if that means in the long term potentially weakening the United States' role in Northeast Asia.
There was a lot of criticism of President Trump in recent months, as there's been a lot of back and forth on Twitter, sometimes threats, veiled or otherwise, being lobbed, and insults back and forth, and some criticism of President Trump, people saying, he's being too aggressive on this matter. Is this now proof that perhaps that he wasn't too aggressive, that his approach is a one that could be useful in this term?
Well, one of the things that the White House and its allies have been pushing is the idea that President Trump has mastered something called the madman theory, which is that you look so crazy that you are willing to use an attack on a nuclear power that other people realize that they have to deal with you, because if they don't deal, it's going to be worse for them in the long run. I'm not sure that's really what's going on here. I think that President Trump has shown that whatever the tenor of the situation is in the Korean Peninsula, he's going to exaggerate that. When tensions were high last summer, his Twitter feed and his press conferences exaggerated that. Now, with a spirit of reconciliation coming out of Korea, he's playing into that. The downside now is that we might get a bad deal out of the Korean Peninsula. The very worst downside is that that expectations are running so high that if President Trump goes to a summit with Kim and doesn't come back with peace in our time, we might be right back where we were last summer, with people worrying about a dramatic nuclear test by the North Koreans or something even worse.
Let's step back and look at history for a minute. The last time that we saw major U.S. powers go and meet with a North Korean leader was under the Clinton administration. Do you think that that's been sort of the most progress we've seen under recent presidents was during the Clinton administration?
I think that's probably about right. And even during the Clinton administration, there were always some sorts of threats of military force being kept in the back. But what's different about the Clinton administration to the Trump administration is that the Clinton administration refused to meet with North Korea's then leader, the current Kim's father, without preconditions, including denuclearization, whereas President Trump committed, seemingly on the spur of the moment, to a summit meeting. That might mean that President Trump has a strategy for bringing things to an even more fruitful conclusion than the Clinton-era talks did, or it might just mean that the president is flying without the sort of strategic guidance that led the Clinton and Bush and Obama administrations not to meet with either Kim, without any sort of guarantee that they would result in a settlement favorable to the United States.
In the little bit of time we have left, I want to bring Iran into this, because President Trump is coming toward the deadline to decide what he will do with an Iran nuclear deal. How does that fit into this larger, very complicated issue?
It's enormously important for the United States to show that when it reaches a deal with a government over denuclearization or halting a nuclear program, that the United States will keep to that deal. If Pyongyang sees that the United States walks away from a deal that the Iranians seem to be complying with, their faith and credibility in the United States to abide by a deal reached in Korea will plummet, and that will leave us in a much worse and much more dangerous situation than we are right now.
Well, we'll keep watching it. Paul Musgrave, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.